Hi guys, welcome back to We Should Talk, a pop culture interview series from In the Know. I'm your host, Gibson Johns, and this week on the podcast we have Dr. Wendy Osefo from The Real Housewives of Potomac, author of the new book, Tears of My Mother, The Legacy of My Nigerian Upbringing. It is out on Tuesday, September 20th, which might be when you're listening to or watching this interview. But Wendy and I went long on this book. I had sped through it. I dog-eared passages that I wanted to read back and unpack with her, and we touched upon a lot of different parts of her life. And, you know, I think a lot of RHOP people have been writing books recently, and I think it makes sense because we have been following these ensemble shows for years and years and years, and we know a lot about their lives, but ultimately there's only so much detail that they can share on camera, and they're allotted time on their shows. So this just I just feel like I know her so much better after reading this book. And I felt the same way about Leah McSweeney's book, which I had her on to talk about earlier this year. There's just so much to talk about and so much to unpack. So we spent about 45 minutes just going through a lot of that. And it's interwoven with Housewives because I think there are certain things that have happened in her life, certain ways that she views the world, that have really prepared her for being on Housewives and kind of inform her approach to the show as well. And then we spent the last 5 or 10 minutes obviously talking about that amazing Season 7 trailer. Season 7 of Potomac is obviously back in October, and if you're engaging with this interview, I'm guessing you've already seen that trailer, but I haven't stopped thinking about it. So there were certain moments that I had to ask her about that had to do with her, and she had some interesting teases for us. Obviously, she can't say too much. But yeah, she was really generous with her time, and it's always really fun to go deep with Wendy, and I just love her, and I'm so excited that she's continuing on the show, and again, that she gave us this book. So get Tears of My Mother wherever you get your books, starting on September 20th. Tune in to Real Housewives of Potomac later this fall, and please rate, review, and subscribe to We Should Talk on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so we're here with Dr. Wendy Osefo, star of The Real Housewives of Potomac, but more pertinently right now, the author of Tears of My Mother, The Legacy of My Nigerian Upbringing. Wendy, I got this book 2 days ago, as you know, and I sped through it in time for this interview. I have it literally, there are Post-it notes with passages I want to read to you. I'm so excited to have you on to talk about this book. It really, I learned so much generally from this book about the experience of first generation children growing up in America, but also just about you and your life. I feel privileged to have read it. So thank you for being here and taking the time to talk about it.
Well, thank you for having me. And that means so much to me. As I was embarking on this, I said, if anything, when people leave this book, I want them to feel like I know her. Like I actually know her. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, that was one of my first questions for you, which is because I feel like we've been getting a good amount of books from people that are on Bravo in recent years. And I think, we feel like we know you guys already because you're on these shows that we follow so intimately, but ultimately they're ensemble shows which means you only have so much airtime to share your personal story. And so was one of the aims of writing this book just to kind of color in some of those lines for people?
Absolutely. I think for me, this book served as a form of therapy. It was like cathartic. Like there were times I would break down crying. If anyone, gets the audiobook, you will literally hear me reading passages and I will be sobbing as I'm reading it. There was one that was so bad, the editor was like, let's do a take two on that. Because I was just like,
I don't blame you. Oh my gosh.
it was so much. But I just wanted people to get to know me and get to know the experiences of a first gen, immigrant and get to know the dynamics of like motherhood. I feel like when we talk about motherhood, it's all roses and flowers. Oh, it's going to change your life. It's going to be so amazing. And I'm saying, wait, wait, wait. There's two sides to motherhood. There's motherhood from the lens of you being a mom yourself, but then there's motherhood from the lens of you being a child to your mom and how that dynamic changes. So I just wanted an honest, illustration of how motherhood and the mother-daughter relationship can be challenging.
I mean, I think that you absolutely captured that and accomplished that. When did you first tell your mom that you were working on this, and what was her reaction?
I told her maybe after I started doing an outline of it. I
Okay.
didn't know where I wanted to go a little bit. I didn't know if I wanted to focus more so on the nuances of motherhood, like in an abstract way, or if I wanted to incorporate my own personal story and then have like lessons to take away from it. And so when I decided I wanted to use this as, yes, to talk about motherhood, but then also to get people to know me better, I was like, well, let Susan know because, she's like a main character in this book. So I let her know, and of course she's like, "Oh, that's great," but I don't know, I don't think she knew all that it would entail, and she has not read this book.
Hmm. And is that her decision not to have read it, or are you like, Mom, let's wait? Like, what's that conversation like?
You know what? To be quite honest with you, I think it's twofold. One, it's it's an accurate depiction of my mom, right? Like in her head, she thinks it's going to be glowing remarks in this book. I mean, for goodness sake, she's like, I'm on the cover. There's no way this book can say anything bad about me. And then the other piece is for me, I wanted her to read it, but not before, because I didn't want her feedback to make me alter my truth. Because
Absolutely.
the truth of the matter is there's different sides to each story. This is my version. And she may have a counterpoint, but that's great. Get your own book deal and you write your counterpoint. But for me, this is how I experience our relationship.
Totally. Well, and I think that you don't shy away from details that might not she might not see as positive, but ultimately,
Yeah.
once you get through all the ups and downs of your relationship and your life, like
Yeah.
the conclusion of the book is just really beautiful. So I hope that
Mm.
whenever Susan does read it, that she sees that, you know what I mean? Because I think
Yeah.
it's hard to end this and feel like it's anything but positive, you know?
Right, right. Well, thank you for saying that because I feel like she's gonna read like the first chapter and the second chapter. She's gonna be like,
Right, which aren't,
all
I
for her
mean,
head.
yeah.
So I hope she makes it through the book because for yes, it's an evaluation of our relationship, but it's also me like as the reader is reading it, I'm talking things through. Like how do I finally get to this point where I'm at peace, right? And so that's the journey the readers go on is like there's a time where I'm just so mad, then I'm conflicted, then there's times where I just want to push away, but then I realize, wait, this is what my role is and I have to be okay with it.
Right, totally. So you dedicate the book to, and I'm quoting you, any first generation child who ever felt like they were not enough, who felt like they never
Mm,
belonged. Our story is unique, but that is what makes it so beautiful. In this moment, I hope you feel seen. And I'm wondering if, I mean, obviously, and again, I think that the contents of this book reflect a lot of that message, and I think a lot of people will see themselves in your story. Is that something that you already experienced via Real Housewives, which is like you scratching the surface on some of these kind of aspects of your life? Were people
mm.
who were also first generation children reaching out to you and relating to your story already?
Yeah, and I think that that's the beauty for all people can say. That's the beauty of reality TV
Yeah.
is you're gonna have some people who see you, see your story, hear your story, and say, I relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, whether it was my first season or my second, I had so many first gens reach out to me and say, I relate to that story. I know what it means to want to chase your own dreams, but because our parents sacrificed so much, we put ourselves on the back burner to make them happy.
Mm.
And so it's a nuanced story, but it's still relatable and it's relatable to some people from the first gen lens, but then it's also relatable to people just being a daughter. And
Right.
then there's the aspect of it of for some people of color, when you are the person who made it, you have this undue burden put on you that now you have to carry everyone behind you. So there's so many layers to it
Yeah.
that I think it definitely peels back a lot of layers.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the passages that stuck out to me is just being like, it kind of encapsulated the experience that you have had just growing up was the overarching experience of being first gen is of fighting against being different while also being inherently different. It's loving your culture
Mm.
and being afraid to show it. Um,
Whew,
and I'm
that gave
wondering
me
if,
chills.
yeah, it's a really, I mean, that just like encapsulates it for me as somebody
Yeah.
who is not first gen, but now again, I can really like understand the experience of this book, but I'm curious if you remember the first time that like you realize that a lot of this, and this is again a generalization, but there's a lot of similarities in the experiences of first generation children. Like, was that when you were growing up, was that something you noticed ever, I don't know, in
Mhm.
high school, or was it not till later?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, so it's interesting. It was something that I noticed once I got to college.
mm,
I went to high school, and my high school wasn't very diverse.
right.
I was one of four Black girls in my class, and of those four, I was the only immigrant. So once I got to college was when my eyes were open to this subset of first generation immigrants, to the point that they had like different organizations on college campuses celebrating that. And when we would just have, programs and different workshops, we would share our story. And it was like, were you peeking in my window when I was growing up? Because you're saying the same thing that I experienced. And so I think my college experience was really eye-opening for me as far as just the immigrant story. And to be quite honest, it translated not just for Nigerians or Africans. I had friends from across the globe who were first gen, and they all would share the same story.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just like a really unique time for me. Like college was the best 4 years ever for so many reasons, but that was definitely one of them.
Yeah, yeah, and it was so interesting also hearing about just how much you jumped around to different places and
Oh
different schools
yeah.
growing up and how that impacted that. So it also felt like part of the reason why college was so great for you was because you were in one place for a good amount of
Oh
time
my
and like
gosh,
yeah.
that's such a good point. I never thought of that. And if we relate that to housewives, because I am used to being in and out of different circles, that's why the transition to housewives was easy for me. But that's also why I'm able to end a relationship so abruptly,
Ah,
because I have had to do that, and I'm okay. I know that at the end of the day, you're going to survive, because,
mm,
sometimes you see housewives and people are like, oh my God, the ending of their relationship really bothered me. And I'm like, okay.
right.
But
Uh-huh.
that's not a good thing, but that's part of where that comes from,
Right.
is knowing that in a year you'll be around a new group of women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll get to this later because there were also other things that I kind of picked up that was like, oh, like
Mm,
this makes sense for housewives. Like, and again, we'll get to it later because but when you talk about your relationship with your mother and your sister kind of being a triangle and how like friends aren't as important as that, and like that to me would just kind of encapsulated that and how that prepped you for it.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but so what you discuss kind of throughout there are inklings of your relationship with your father, Edwin, who you ultimately never were that close with. Your sister is
Hmm.
closer with him. And you say at one point that like you're very much at peace with the fact that you don't really need to pursue a close relationship with him. And whatever you feel, I mean, because and you don't go super, you don't really explain that point a lot. But I'm wondering if you feel comfortable sharing any more about the reasons why you are just content in not kind of pursuing a closer, more intimate relationship with your father.
It's interesting because I feel like since he wasn't there for my formidable years in my childhood, I feel like I don't necessarily need him in adulthood. It's almost like with parenting, and I say this as a mom myself, when your kids are younger, they need you. They depend on you. They need you for basic necessities. But when your children get older, yes, we may need them, but it's for different reasons. It's
Mm,
for emotional support, it's for friendship, it's to be the wise sage in the room. And since now I'm in my 30s, I can look to someone who's a complete stranger to occupy that space, because that's a space that he's never occupied before. So the same way I can go to him for advice is the same way I can go to John Smo on the street for advice, right? So
sure.
that's where I'm coming from. And by all means, I don't hate him. I spoke to him like 2 weeks ago, and it was just like, hey, how are you? How's everything? How are the kids? Blah blah blah. But I have learned to survive without him,
Yeah.
and so I'm okay living without him.
And I thought it was so interesting hearing you observe your daughter's relationship with Eddie and seeing
Mm,
how it's something that you never really had because they have such a great father-daughter relationship. It's so intimate as you describe in the
mhm,
book.
mhm.
Um, have you and Eddie discussed that topic at all, like and compared those two relationships?
We do, and if I tell you that I feel like I didn't miss out on something, I would be lying. Like just
Hmm.
to see how my daughter absolutely adores her dad, and just to see how Eddie absolutely adores Cameron. I mean, it's sickening. Like literally, like you guys are just too much. But they just
I love it.
love each other. And I it's something that you look at and you're like, man, I admire that and I wish I had that. And Eddie and I have talked about it, and I've said I I often think of whether I would be the woman I am today if I had my father in my life, or certain decisions I made. Would I have made those same decisions if I had my father in my life? And I do think that fathers play a unique role in the lives of their children, both men and women. And I know that there is a part of me that will forever be incomplete because I didn't have that.
Mm,
And even though I'm able to survive without it, I know if he was in my life, I will probably thrive, but
mm.
he's not.
Right. But you say incomplete, but I feel like it's incomplete, but not at peace or not unhappy with
Mm,
that. It's just because that is what you
yeah.
know, right? And I feel
Yeah,
like, but it's also you can acknowledge that there's a piece missing.
absolutely. And what's so funny, you know, I did, like you said, I didn't go down the rabbit hole like discussing that. Growing up, my mom was everything and she did so much for us, and she did so much to the point that I was like, we're fine. We came out okay. We didn't need that. But now that I'm older, I'm like, and I see Eddie and Cameron, I'm like, yeah, there's certain things that a dad occupies, and no matter how hard you
Right.
try as a mom, those things are still missing.
Yeah, especially because again, as this whole book can attest, like the relationship between a mother and a daughter is so complex,
Yes.
yeah, and so it's not having the father there is adds to that. But
Yeah.
obviously, I mean, the biggest through line of this book is the fact that the way that you were raised impacted the way that you raise your children, to me, like that's a huge point that you're making, and the one line that you say, literally you say, read that again twice, that this is the line that you say: mom raised us in the world that she was living in, I raise my children in the world they are living in. And I
Mm,
think that, and you explain that more in depth at different points in the
mhm.
book, especially at the end, and your approach to different things. But is that something that you always felt that you like, were you growing up and you were like, okay, when I have kids, I'm going to raise them differently from my mom? Or was it only when you had started to have kids that you were like, okay, I naturally am just gravitating towards a different approach?
So that was it. It was like when my mom was raising us, I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is how you raise your kids. And then the older I got, and now I had my own kids, I'm like, wait, that's not necessarily true.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to my mom the other day, and she was talking about making sacrifices. And she was like, and if you can't, she was talking to me, she's like, and if you can't make sacrifices, you go to the person in the village and you borrow their goats. And I'm like, we're not
Where's the
like
goat?
we're not in that. Where's the goat? We're not in Nigeria. We're not in the village, and that's just some of the antidotes that she will use. And it's like it doesn't cross translate. Like it doesn't. It's not applicable here. And I feel like the best thing as parents you can do is like, yes, this is how we grew up. Like, yeah, we would come inside when the street lights came on. But now for some kids, if we try to use that analogy, some kids are not even out that late because they're watching YouTube. So I just
Right.
think that it's important for parents just to be very aware of the current climate of the world their child
Yeah.
is in, and make pivots to that and understand that.
Mm-hmm. What do you think your mom generally makes of your approach to parenting? Like, do you think that does she try to give you tidbits and things? I'm sure she does, but I'm
Yeah.
also sure, knowing again how you describe her in the book and what we've seen on the show, it seems like she also generally approves of your approach at parenting.
Yeah, so I think that, overall my mom does give me tidbits. She lets me do my own thing. But she also feels that at times I may be too hands off. But that's only because my one son, he loves the arts. He absolutely loves the arts. And I'm like, would you want to be an artist one day? And he's like, that would be awesome. And my mom is in the corner like, hmm. Like
That's
scoffing.
not a lawyer, right?
That's not a lawyer. That's not a doctor. What are we doing here? But generally speaking, she approves.
hmm So I wanted to bring up the passage that I alluded to earlier because to me that like
Okay.
it's the one about the triangle with you and your sister and your mother and
Yes.
I literally read this little part and I was like, this to me explains a lot about why you were a natural fit for Potomac and Real Housewives and it just like your outlook. So you say, my mom always said, the only friends you have here are me and your sister. We're all we have. Her meaning was, no matter how close you get with people outside the family, you can't trust them like family. When your best friends are your mom and your sister, the bar is so high that anyone else who comes into your life is expendable. To this day, I don't have a lot of girlfriends. I don't need them because I have my mom and my sister. Maybe my mother, sister, and I are too dependent on one another. But if you're going to depend on someone, let it be your family. And I just
Mm-hmm.
feel like that encapsulates your approach to housewives, but also maybe the approach that a lot of people need to have if you're on housewives, because you have to be okay with things shifting a lot and friendships maybe ending or changing for good. Or do
Mm-hmm.
you think that mentality that you had did prepare you for your time on housewives?
I think so. And I think that, I will never be that housewife that you hear me saying the deep, dark secret to one of the girls. Like, no, that's
Right.
not, that's not, that's not what's gonna happen. But I think that, with that mentality of just depending on my mom and my sister, it also gives me a beautiful definition of what friendship really is. And
Mm-hmm.
I have some amazing girlfriends in my life. And for them to be in my life, like one of my best friends, we've been best friends since we were 15. And so they come very close to characteristics of my mom and my sister. But in the same token, I would say it also, if you flip it on its head, when my mom and my sister do things that hurt, those are the moments where I'm like, oh man, I wish I had an
Mm.
outsider who could support me in the ways in which I'm lacking right now. So
Mm-hmm.
it goes both ways. And funny enough, let me tell you, before I got on Housewives, my favorite franchise was Jersey. And we talked earlier about the relatability piece. For me, watching Jersey, I understood Teresa. I understood Joe. I understood Melissa. Like when Teresa said, "You don't go against the family," I was like, yes, I
Mm-hmm.
get that. And so that's what I mean when I say like first generation, they're from the Italian immigrant family and just that quality that is embedded in a lot of us. And when I tell you, Eddie and I will watch that show like glue every single Sunday before like Housewives was even there. I was such a Jersey fan because I related to that. I know the importance of family and them being your foundation.
Mm-hmm. It's family being the foundation, and then it's also how when family is also when family members are also your best friends, how that cross pollination can sometimes get complicated, right?
Yes,
And that's so interesting that you
absolutely.
saw so much of yourself in that story as well. It makes complete sense now.
I did. And then another piece is also understanding the pain they felt because when family is the foundation and you guys are so strong, when they hurt you, it's like 20 times more than any outsider hurting you. Like it
Mm-hmm.
it runs very, very deep.
Mm-hmm. You said that you sort of sometimes long for that kind of partner in crime that's like not part of the family.
Hmm.
Do you wish that you had that within the confines of the show, or are you okay with not having that sort of, because it's like, Giselle and Robin are always going to be partners in crime on that show. Do you feel like you want that, or are you okay kind of not have and being a little bit more malleable in the group?
Child, season 7. I may have me a little partner in crime season
Okay.
7.
Okay.
You guys have to stay tuned. But no, I think one thing that I would say about season 7 that makes it so good to me is the change in the dynamics. Like when I say things are like completely 180, you'll be like, wow. And people, what I learned from season 7 is people who you don't expect supporting you and being there for you
Mm.
and riding for you in ways that you're like, you are my sister.
Oh,
I do love you.
I love
I
that.
know, right?
Well, I think that
I
that to
know,
me is what that's why Potomac is my favorite Housewives franchise, is because you guys
right? Mm,
continue to you're not afraid of changing it up and letting things, maybe become unexpected in terms of the alliances and the friendships. Like that's, you have to keep changing it up. That's what makes it an interesting
yeah,
show. You know what I mean? And it's a perfect
yeah,
group of women. So
absolutely.
I'm excited to
Yay,
see
thank you.
who I'm excited to see who you're moving around with in this
You'll be
season.
so surprised. You'll be so surprised.
The other thing that I and you've talked about this on the show, but the other thing that I sort of might have kind of prepared you for the experience of Housewives was you called it a whisper campaign that that Eddie's or his parents kind of had
Hmm.
when you guys were about to get married, and sort of how that went through the community that you're a part of. And that again, to me, it must have in some ways prepared you for knowing that people are talking about you, and you have to tune some of that out probably. Like that's kind of how social media plays into being on Housewives, right? So do you feel like that there's a parallel there as well?
Absolutely, I think there's a parallel. And I think that, when you go through a marriage and preparation for marriage in such a tight-knit community, and there are whispers which are built chiefly on falsities, then it does build you with a layer of armor and tough skin to be able to navigate through life. And so that's why sometimes when people are like, oh, she got plastic surgery because of social media, I'm like, do you guys know what I've been through? I've literally had my wedding and my marriage on display to be criticized by an entire
Mm,
community. And we didn't budge. No, I got my body done because, hey, I was done with my last baby and
there
I
we
can.
go.
Why not? So that was always interesting to me. But absolutely, when you are critiqued by people who actually see you, forget people on the internet, but who see you, who
Yeah.
you see at the market on Sunday, people who your parents are in different organizations with, that that traumatizes you in a way that it's literally sink or swim.
Hmm.
And 12 years later, been married for 12 years, I can say that we successfully swam. So yeah.
Yeah, and and it's just, if it's happening so close to home, then the people who you don't even see
Mhm.
their faces on Twitter, it's like who cares, right? It's like
Child, go ahead with your made up account. You can say what you want to say because literally we would walk outside and there'll be people talking about us. So
hmm.
we're fine.
And again, I think that this book is it colors in the lines of your life in ways that the show has not been able to do, just because of, again, like you're on a show with with 7 women, so it's
Right.
time is there isn't that much time. But I think I'm sure there are going to be factions of people who want to come to this book expecting, the piping tea on the housewives behind the scenes or your
Right.
castmates or whatever. And like, I mean, the title of the book literally tells you that that's not what you're going to get. But was there ever any like temptation or pressure or whatever to include more of that behind the scenes stuff? Because I'm sure eventually there'll be a book down the line, Wendy, where we get
I was
that.
about
But
to
like,
say,
right,
I was about to say that's book number 2 or 3.
right.
But I wanted to touch upon what I always have gotten is people saying, "How did you even get to Housewives?" Like just
Mm-hmm.
given your background. So I mentioned that in the book. I talk about like how did I get here?
Yep.
How did the chance meeting happen? And another piece of the book that I talk about is being a political commentator and some of the backstory to that. And I talk about this really horrific incident that happens in the green room of Fox News with a politician who is still a politician right now, who's a
Mm-hmm.
sitting, senator. And so I talk about those things. So I try to cover different elements and aspects of my life But if I could, my dream would be to write a book on each element, like a book completely
Yeah.
dedicated to politics, a book completely dedicated to housewives. But I think for me, I wanted people to get to know me first and then take them on a journey of the different
The
elements.
foundation, right? We have the
Yeah.
full foundation of, I feel like, of you now with this book, and then
Yeah.
it's there's so many other chapters of your life. And yeah, when you bring up the commentating, and I found one of the parts I found so interesting was you're sitting at dinner with Eddie and you're talking about wanting to be kind of marry entertainment and politics, and what does that look
Mhm.
like, and and Eddie asks you a question. He's like, who's going to listen to you? And it wasn't a question that was like
Mhm.
ill meaning. It was just like a genuine, like,
Mhm.
think about this, like, who's going to listen to what you have to
Right.
say? And that's what
Right.
really sparked your decision to get a PhD, which I think, again,
Right.
I don't think I'd heard that story. I thought that was so interesting and made so much sense, and I love that you included
Yeah.
that, because and that's
I,
that's a moment of tough love in a marriage, but also like that's why you guys are so good together, like you ask the questions.
well, thank you. Well, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Because I was like, I had seen at that time he was a commentator on CNN, Mark Lamont Hill, and I saw him. I was like, that's who I want to be. Like he was so cool, but he was so smart. And I'm like, that's me. And I never felt till today, to be quite honest, I've never felt like academia has a place for me because in academia, I'm still the youngest professor in my department. It's very traditional in
Yeah.
nature. And so when I come into the classroom, even with, blonde highlights in my hair or my long nails, it's like, whoa. And I wanted to be in a space that I could use my education, but still be 100% authentic and be me. And that's what started the journey of me getting all of my credentials to be able to occupy the space as a
Mm-hmm.
commentator. But, you know, I that's something that I've never shared until today. I never feel 100% comfortable in my faculty meetings
Mm.
or whenever I go to campus because I know that I don't belong. And I know that people who are like me are not seen in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once people understand that, they will understand how I could do housewives because I am an academic by profession, but who I am and what I am, I'm a rebel. I am the rebel of academia. So of course it would be me who does housewives,
Yeah.
But that's a testament.
Absolutely. And I think it also gets back to what you were saying at the beginning of this interview, which was like, just by the virtue of who you are and your identity in different ways, like you sometimes carry the burden of being the first or being the only. And I think that you wear that well, but it's not an easy thing to go through. And I think that you're, in so many different ways, you're paving the way for other people. And I think that, but also you recognizing that there isn't a full comfort there for you in that space,
Yeah.
and that's a space that your mom has wanted you to occupy. So it's just an interesting push and pull there.
Absolutely. It's so hard though. I would be lying to you if I tell you that it's not.
Of
It's
course.
so hard and it's like a sense of imposter syndrome. Whenever I'm in meetings, I overcompensate because I know that everyone around is probably like, how did she get here? And it's really something that I struggle with. And I think that's another thing in this book that I want readers to get out of it is people see what you have achieved, but they don't know what you've gone through or even what you are going through. And so, yes, I'm Dr. Wendy with the 4 degrees, but if you read the book, you will see how hard that was for me, how I had failures along the way, and how even till now I'm not fully comfortable even occupying that space is just by happenstance. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. And one of the other through lines that I think is really, I think it's something that a topic that is sometimes avoided. And I think we've seen it play out in some of the reunions. It definitely happens on social media around Potomac, which is colorism. And there was a really interesting, when you were talking about growing up and you and your sister coming back from school and watching TV and in some ways being raised by TV, there was this
Mm-hmm.
passage where you talked about, um, let's see, you say, when I was growing up, we had the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, A Different World, and Martin. On all those shows, the father daughter was dark skinned and the wife mother was always light skinned. You never saw a family on TV where the mother wife had dark skin. subconsciously my brain picked up that the sitcom message that to be loved and have a family one day, women had to have light skin. And then you sort of bring it back when you talk about joining Potomac and how now people get to
Mm-hmm.
see your beautiful dark-skinned family, and how that is not the norm on a lot of these shows.
Yeah.
And I think it's a complex conversation, obviously, but I think again,
Yeah.
like, you're not shying away from having that conversation. I think that we're all the better for hearing these conversations and listening to your experience and how that was put into you growing up. And I don't know, I just think it's a full circle moment, honestly, because
Mm-hmm.
that message had gone into your head at such a young age, and now you get to represent something different
Absolutely.
for people. So I just thought that was pretty special.
Oh, oh, absolutely. And yes, it is, and it's not lost on me either. It's not lost on me that all of us have a beautiful platform and we're able to show different things. And I get so many people who come up to me or who DM me and who say, thank you. Thank you for being a representation of a dark-skinned woman on TV. I didn't have that. And, that touches me because I know growing up, I didn't have that. And then to be a dark-skinned woman who is not depicted as someone who is lesser than the others, right? It's actually you're the dark skinned woman. You are the one who is the professor. You are the one who's married and you have your kids. And I think that that's important because I am the mother to three dark skinned children, and even in particular, my dark skinned daughter. And I think that it's very important for her to one day see that her mom was represented in this ensemble cast with different hues. And I think that, there's beauty in all shades. Representation does matter. So I am very glad and deeply honored to occupy that space in
Mm,
Potomac.
that's I just it's just really, that's there are no words really to just kind of convey how
Mm-hmm.
special and meaningful it is to so many people. And I think that, again, like, I watching this show as just a fan of reality TV, I've learned so much even in just that aspect. So I think that I just appreciated that being a little bit included in the book. Um,
Oh, thank you.
Tears of My Mother is amazing, and again, everyone who's a Potomac fan, a Housewives fan, a Bravo
Mhm.
fan needs to pick it up. But Wendy, before I
Yeah.
get let you go, I do want to ask you about the trailer. The
Yes.
trailer came out, and there are a couple things I just need to ask, because we're coming up on season 7, your third season on the
Okay.
show. Um,
Yes.
I guess before we get into the trailer, I'm curious if by season 3, does that shift your mind at all? Because I think in our last interview we talked about sort of like the expectation of a second season and how that's kind of a tough
Mm-hmm.
transition to make. Does the third
Mm-hmm.
season feel more solidified for you? Does it feel like a deep breath at all?
Yeah, I think, your third season is like, okay, I got this. We can take the trainers off. Like,
Yeah.
I think I got it. But of course, leave it to the crazy cast of Potomac to throw you for a loop. But going into it in the beginning, I was like, I got this. This makes sense. It makes sense. So yes,
Okay,
I think
good.
third season is where you start to have fun.
There we go. I like that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of the trailer, you say hi to Giselle and she goes, "No touching." Is there any chance for you guys? Is there any chance for you two?
I think that actually is a beautiful depiction of us. Like I am at the place where, we had the reunion, we set our piece, she sees it from one way, I see it from another, and I've moved on from it. I'm not harping on it. So my gesture was, an olive branch, like, and then in true form, no touching. I'm like,
Okay.
okay, girl, come on.
But Wendy, you guys are AKA sisters. You mentioned AKA in the book, and I'm
Yes,
like,
I
maybe
do.
has that ever been a through line for you guys to try to connect on that level? I don't know.
When I first met her, we did. We had like a little,
Okay.
a little conversation about it. But
But you're
who
still very
knows what the
different, right?
future?
Exactly.
Yeah, who knows what the future holds with me and her? At this point, I'm like, girl, all right.
Okay. I think a lot of people were intrigued by a part of the trailer that kind of insinuates that Ashley and Candace might be seeing eye to eye this season or bonding this
Okay.
season.
Mhm.
Is that going to happen? What can you tell me about is that kind of unexpected potential connection?
I think the operative word is insinuate.
Okay.
um,
If you want to be reading
I
into it.
personally, I
Okay.
personally, I personally, from from me, Dr. Wendy, I love them together. We just need to get them to love them together. But I love them together. They're a good time.
I think that's what a lot of fans feel. It's like there
Yeah.
are on paper a lot of similarities between Ashley and Candace,
Hmm.
but just
Absolutely. It's
sometimes it's
like
oil and water though. I don't know. It's it's interesting. Um Therese is back in the picture this season, and it's there's
hmm
tease. Definitely her and Karen have something going on this season.
hmm
What's your relationship with with Therese?
I like Charisse. I think that she definitely brought a different level of energy to to our little group, and she shook the table. Yeah, yeah.
She
She
wasn't afraid to go
she didn't
there,
come to sit around.
right?
No, she was not. She was not a wallflower. She said,
Hey,
if I'm
I'm
gonna
not
be
mad
here,
about
I'm
that.
gonna be here.
I'm not
I'm
mad
not
about
either.
that.
I'm not either.
When and it clearly a large portion of the trailer kind of talks about a DM that Giselle apparently gets from Chris Bassett, and that hurting her relationship with Candace, and just the fallout seemingly from that. He tweeted that now it's his turn to kind of go through it.
Okay.
I mean, is that taking center stage this season? The Candace and Chris of it all.
It's definitely talked about. I think that a theme that you can always count on in Potomac is someone's husband. Okay. Last season it was mine.
Yeah.
So I say that to say you can always count on that. But I think what makes season 7 unique for me is that we do not get stuck on one thing. And I and in return, I think that the viewers will also see that. Like, yes, we talk about that, and yes, that's discussed, but there's so many other things and shifting dynamics that happen that for me, just filming it, yes, that was a focal point. But then the next day, it was like, dun, 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 dun. And
Okay.
that's what makes this season really good.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you and Eddie must be like, okay, thank God it's not our turn anymore. Like, gee, like, come on.
Child, listen, but let me tell you know what? Stay tuned because they always find a way to mess
Hmm.
with Eddie.
Okay.
But stay tuned.
Eddie knows how to handle it, but it's
He
like, come on
does.
now.
Come on now.
And then Wendy, I mean, the end of the trailer, we see Mia splash her. It looks like an entire drink on you. You call her a crater face B. What can you? I know you can't tell me, but what can you
Uh-huh.
tease as to what leads to you and Mia maybe coming to a head?
I would tell the viewers to pay very close attention to her from the beginning
Okay.
and see if the action matched the words. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. And that's why, if you pay attention to the trailer, Karen is so relaxed and calm because there was nothing there. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
It comes.
If it was
It kind of comes from nowhere a
it
little bit for you,
exactly because if there was something tense, Karen, she's not in any mess. She would have probably gotten up, she would
right?
have walked away, or she would have been like this. But you can tell from her demeanor
Uh,
completely that this is not anything. Like,
they're
we're
sitting
not.
at dinner, right? Huh.
Yes, but pay
Well,
very close
well,
attention.
it's Wendy. It sounds like season 7 is another one for the books from you guys. I'm so
Mm-hmm.
excited. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time today.
Oh, thank
I love
you.
doing a deep dive with you always, particularly with this special book that you have gifted to us.
Oh,
Tears of My Mother is
yes.
out Tuesday, September 20th. that might be when you're listening or watching this interview, whoever's watching us, but I highly recommend it. I learned so much about you, and it's just really special. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And it's always an honor and a treat to talk with you. Thank you.
You too. And I'll see you at BravoCon, Wendy.
Woo, woo, woo. All righty.
Thanks for tuning in to We Should Talk. I hope you enjoyed the interview. You can find out more about In the Know at intheknow.com. You can follow me, Gibson Johns, at Gibsonoma on Twitter and Instagram. And you can listen to all of our interviews, past and future, by searching We Should Talk wherever you get your podcasts. Hope to see you next time.